I miss playing music every day because I still have a self-image of musician. I mean, that's what I always did the best.
This is Joe Wong. Welcome to the Trap Set, where each week we explore the lives of drummers. I want to play something for you.
Times I've waited patiently for you, and you'll do just what you choose to do, and I will be alone again tonight, my dear.
You're hearing Alone Again or by Love, featuring my guest, Michael Stuart, on drums. Headquartered in a Los Feliz mansion affectionately dubbed The Castle, Love ruled over the LA rock scene during the 1960s. Perhaps because the band's eccentric leader Arthur Lee refused to tour, or perhaps because Love was just too far ahead of its time, the band never became a household name. But over the past 50 years, Love's timeless body of work has influenced countless artists and garnered overwhelming critical acclaim. Michael grew up on a diet of big band and bebop. His rhythmic agility and powerful sense of swing proved the perfect foundation for Love's classic albums Da Capo and Forever Changes. I spoke to him in his adopted hometown, Las Vegas. And now my conversation with Michael Stuart.
I was born in East Texas, and my dad worked for Chance Vaught. He wrote design proposals for Chance Vaught, aircraft manufacturers, and he did that during the week. And then on the weekends, he played piano with his band, the Salty Dogs. Bunch of ex-Navy guys. They wore their Navy hats on stage and wore tight white T-shirts. You know, they looked every bit the part. Drummer's name was Biff Murphy. And he used to leave his drums at our house all the time because that's where they practiced. And so I'd mess around with his drums a little bit. But I had my own little red metal toy set. And my mom would play piano, and I'd bang along with her on my toy set. And, you know, when I was a kid, a little older, I listened to all the early rock and roll people like Chuck Berry and Little Richard. And when I was about 12, we moved to San Diego because my dad got a job with Roar Aircraft, doing basically the same kind of work. And I got into junior high right about that time. And so I thought, well, I'll join the band. So I joined the band and played snare drum. And then in the 10th grade, I graduated over to Claremont High School and started playing timpani. And I played a trap set of drums in the pit band, and we had a stage band that played jazz compositions written by like Count Basie and those kind of composers. And so in high school, I started listening to a lot of the early cool jazz, like Dave Brubeck, Jerry Mulligan, and Coleman Hawkins, people like that. And so at the end of my high school time, I was offered a scholarship up to Pepperdine. I studied psychology. Yeah.
Did you want to be a psychologist?
Yeah, I thought it was all right. I thought that was, see, I was real bad in math, so I couldn't do anything associated with math, and psychology had no math in it, unless you took statistics, which I steered clear of. And so
Did it seem like a possibility to become a professional musician?
I'd always kind of dreamed in the back of my mind of being a professional musician because some of the people I hung out with in high school, we played gigs, little dances and things like that. And so I always thought, wow, this feels good, to make money doing something that I love. And so when I got up to Pepperdine, I started hanging with a friend of mine, Kerry Christie, and he was over at UCLA. And so that was my connection to the UCLA fraternity jobs that we played. And it was just a lot of fun. And so we played a lot of fraternity gigs, and then I ended up dropping out of school in my junior year to do a tour that Kerry had found in the LA Times, actually advertised. It said needed rock bands for the Hollywood A-Go-Go tour. So we thought, hey, that's us, man. So we went down and tried out, and we were selected as one of the bands to go on the Hollywood A-Go-Go tour. So that's what we did.
Well, what was the group name?
The group's name was the Vectors. Yeah, we were not bad, But the thing is, after the tour was over, I had dropped out of school, so I didn't really have anything to do at that point. I was still living at home with my parents. And so I thought, well, I got to start making money here, So a couple of the guys in the Vectors and I started making the rounds of the beer bars in Culver City, actually, in Santa Monica. And one night we dropped into a beer bar called the Mirage, and it was on Santa Monica Boulevard in Santa Monica. And
when you say beer bar, what's the distinction from like a regular bar?
They were actually limited to selling beer and I guess wine, but nobody drank the wine. The Mirage was a happening place, man. The first night we went there was a line down the block. And the band that was playing there was the Fender 4, and these guys could really play. I mean, they played about half of their stuff was just surf music, but the other half was Beatles, early Beatles hits, and a few Rolling Stones hits, and even a James Brown song or two. So I was sitting at a table. And this girl at the next table, they were on break, and she said, are you guys musicians? I said, yeah. She said, well, these guys are looking to replace their drummer. If one of you guys is a drummer, they could do. So anyway, man, my friend Jim, who was with me at the time, I knew he was planning on re-entering school. So I got together with the Fender 4 a couple of times. We rehearsed. They offered me the job. And so I started playing with those guys. Yeah. So one night we were playing at the Beaver Inn, and the music entrepreneur Kim Fowley came in with a bunch of girls, and they just dropped in, and he came in and started doing the Kim Fowley thing. Man, I mean, he was a spectacle, really. And he was dancing, and the girls were dancing around him, and the beer bar people, the UCLA fraternity people, they just kind of backed off and left him out there in the middle of the floor doing his thing. And so at the end of the set, he came over to us and said, yeah, you guys sound really good. He said, but I got to tell you, the Fender 4 is a dog shit name. And he said, you should change your name to the Sons of Adam. And as soon as we heard that, we thought, yeah, Sons of Adam. That's it. Yeah, you know.
This episode of The Trap Set is brought to you in part by Colectivo Coffee. Handmade coffee since 1993. Check them out online at colectivo.com.
The Sons of Adam, instrumentally, we were fantastic. And vocally, we were pretty good, too, you know. But what we didn't do well was we did not write. And that was really a key element in our ability to not do well. You know, I mean, we didn't have any original material. So the Sons of Adam, we began to enter a phase of frustration, you know, where we kind of weren't getting along, actually, you know, because we just couldn't write music. And so about that time, we had played a second bill to Love a few times up in San Francisco, and they were playing over at a little club in Hollywood called Beatolitos, and it was on the side street in back of the Ivar Theater called Cosmo, and it was just an alley. It was only a block long. It looked like it had been originally set up just to take deliveries for businesses that were located over on Ivar. And so we dropped into Beatolitos one night to catch a set by the Love Group. And so we ended up actually doing a set. We did a guest set. And at the end of that guest set, Arthur came over to me and offered me the job playing drums with Love. And I guess, you know, at first I was hesitant because Love had a tremendous reputation for drug use. I mean, they didn't even make any secret of it. Like some of their songs were about using drugs, like You All Be Following was a song written about Arthur trying to score. You know, I went to Johnny, I went to Conca. One of them told me that he was holding. So their drug use was widely known, and the Sons of Adam weren't really into drugs, as I wasn't either. I just wasn't into drugs. And so when Arthur first offered me the opportunity to join the group, I said no thanks. And but a few months went by, and Arthur started dropping in over at the Sons of Adam's house, and you know, just shooting the breeze and showing us music, and he gave us a couple of tunes and invited me over to the castle a few times. We hung out over there. So I sort of got to know Arthur, and I realized he was a good guy, you know, so I sort of lost my apprehension about the drug use, and I went ahead and signed up with the Love Group in time to do the Da Capo album.
What's in your life, dear Stephanie? What's in your life for me? Aches and pains, they cloud your sight. A tiger did, you said it did.
Arthur and Brian engaged in a tug of war over a beautiful girl whose name was Stephanie Buffington. And she went back and forth between Arthur and Brian. First she would be Arthur's girlfriend, then she would be Brian's girlfriend, and then she went back to Arthur. So one of those times she went back to Arthur, he wrote Stephanie Knows Who, And he wrote, like in The Castle, the lyrics, A, my love, B, my love, so hard to choose. A is Arthur, B is Brian. So that album, the lyrics had more to do with his personal thing and less to do with what everybody else was interested in. So no, I didn't really think the subject matter lyrically on Da Capo was nearly as profound as what was on the first album, you know. And the first album was more or less a folk rock album. And Da Capo was more of a jazz rock album. We did some 5/4 stuff and 3/4 stuff, and so it was, and some of the passages taken by Johnny and Jay, like the solo in Stephanie Knows Who, or like the duet actually in Stephanie Knows Who. It was some great jazz, but it was an extreme departure from what had been played on the first album. And it was good, but truth be told, I preferred the material on the first album over what we played on the second album, And then the whole second side of Da Capo was one long John Lee Hooker jam. And I just thought it could have been, better spent putting more songs on than that, But, the point that I was going to make about Arthur and Brian is that when Brian won that battle that they had, it put a little thing in there that eventually grew. And that was a feeling by Arthur that he didn't want to play with Brian anymore. And it got worse and worse as time went on. And also, just about that same time, to add insult to injury, just before we recorded Da Capo, Arthur decided one night he wanted to roll his own hair. And he had been going over to the West Side, and he'd been going to a barber shop, beauty shop place over there, having it done. So he decided to do it himself one day, and he fell asleep with the rollers in and burned his hair off. So it took about 6 months to grow back, and during that time, he wore this Navy watch cap, and he was self-conscious about it. And a lot of stuff went on that fed into what was to become later disharmony in the group, and feelings of ill will.
What is happening and how have you been? Gotta go, but I'll see you again. And the music is so loud. And then I fade into the crowds of people standing everywhere.
The Trap Set will always be available for free, but we rely on donations from our listeners. Please visit our website at thetrapset.net and click donate. Subscribe to our show on iTunes, and if you enjoy what you hear, give us a review.
We went into Sunset Sound to do the Forever Changes album after not really having rehearsed that much, and the material was a little more sophisticated than had been on Da Capo. We really should have practiced more, not less. And
why were you practicing less?
We just spent a lot of time, just getting high and having a good time. And also, there was that feeling of separation. We'd never really hung out anymore together. And by that time, Snoopy was out of the group, as was Jay. So it was just the five of us that were left to do Forever Changes.
What do you remember about recording Forever Changes?
Well, what happened was when we first went in, we really didn't have it together. We hadn't rehearsed enough, and we tried to, I think it was Daily Planet, we tried to lay down that track, and we just tried maybe 3 takes. Didn't try very many at all. And Arthur said, Arthur was in the booth, actually. It was me and Kenny and Johnny and Brian were doing the instrumental track. And Arthur said, let's take a break for a minute. So he huddled up with the Elektra execs, and we all met up in the hall, and he said, we were talking it over, and we think it might be a good idea, just do what the Beach Boys do, and we'll call in some studio people to lay down the instrumental track, and then we'll all do the vocals. And so we all said different things, actually. Some of us said, yeah, sure, whatever. And others said, what do you mean? They said, we want you guys to show up and give the studio people guidance, because we want these instrumental tracks to sound like Love. We don't want them to sound like the instrumental tracks on the Beach Boys records.
Right.
So you guys will need to come in and give advice. So when we showed up the next day or the day after, and the studio people were in there, the first thing I noticed when I walked in was the drummer was the same drummer that I had seen play with the Everly Brothers one night when Snoop and I went to the Hullabaloo Club, and he was fabulous.
Jim Gordon.
Jim Gordon. So I walk in the studio, I just had like tunnel vision right over to the drum baffles where Jim Gordon was getting set up. So I went over, and started talking to him, and the first thing I noticed about his drums was he was playing Camco drums, and I'd never seen a drummer play Camco drums before. Everybody played Ludwig's or Slingerland or Rogers, and Jim Gordon played Camcos. So anyway, we talked for a while, and he was a super nice guy. Asked me if I had any input for him on the records, and so anyway, we all hung out in the studio, and but what was happening was Kenny was over showing the bass player
Carol
Kay the part that she should play, and Arthur overheard, and he was kind of walking by, and he told Kenny, he said, hey, what you're playing sounds great, man. You just go ahead and play bass, and we'll have her play something else, like a rhythm guitar part. And so that's what happened. She played a rhythm guitar part on Daily Planet, and Kenny played bass. And then after that, that afternoon, I think sometime, they laid down a track for And More Again. But that night, we got a call. Johnny and I did. We were rooming together in the house that Snoop and I had been living in. So the Elektra rep calls up and he says, we really don't like the sound that these studio people are getting. And what we would like for you to do is you guys take a few weeks and rehearse this material more, and then come back in and try to do it yourselves. And so we said, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And that's what we did. But the first thing we did when we came back in was we re-recorded And More Again. And the studio people's version of And More Again was thrown out. But they kept their version of Daily Planet.
Did it feel like you were making a classic record at the time, or was it just another record?
Not at all. I felt like we were just struggling our way through a bad scene. And I really just didn't think anything was ever going to happen with that album. It just, because we had too much bad feelings.
Yeah.
We weren't in there having a good time. And to me, it sounded like that.
How does it feel when you hear that music now?
I don't listen to it. I really don't.
Because it brings you back to that bad time?
Yeah, I guess that's probably it. It's just an association in my mind of a time that was difficult rather than a time of happiness and joy. And it's something that, to me, it's like a lot of people. You know, I read the same kind of quotes from actors and actresses that they say, I don't never go see my movies because all I see are the mistakes, and I hate my acting. And I realize that it must be an excellent piece of music, and I'm really happy that people like it. And I know that there must be something there because the critics like it and people enjoy it. So that's great. I'm happy that they do. Yeah.
At my house I've got no shackles. You can come and look if you want to. Through the halls you'll see the mantles where the light shines dim all around you, and the streets are paved with gold. And if someone asks you, you can call my name.
When did you start getting high?
I started smoking weed when I was just about to get into the band, and I would go over to the castle, and Brian used to keep this enormous urn of weed. It'd be about 1 kilo. So I'd go there, and they asked me to roll up a few joints one time, so I didn't even know how. They had to show me, So I started smoking weed then. And what was funny was, it's like just before I joined up, when I wasn't really sure if I wanted to or not, the group's manager said, well, look, come on up with us to Stockton. We're going to do a gig up there, and you can kind of get to know the guys. So we get on the plane, and we're heading out, and this is back when you could smoke on an airplane. How the no smoking signs would come on, and then it would say, then they would go off. So when the no smoking sign went off, I was sitting across the aisle from Arthur. He pulls out a hash pipe, loads the hash pipe, fires it up. He turned on that little fan up above the seats, and he lit up the hash pipe and passed it across the aisle to me. And I'm thinking, we're going to get busted for this. I mean, it doesn't stink like weed does, but hash has a distinct odor to it that's not like air, But so that's when I began to see, okay, these guys get high a lot, so they do it in public. But anyway, I just graduated on to other drugs, I started doing Red Devils, Reds. We started to do a gig, I forget where it was, somewhere, in Las Vegas. And we're on the way in the limo, and Arthur pulls out a small container, and he said, hey, I got a jug of meth. And he pours it in a Coke, and he started passing it around to everybody. And everybody, took a swig of the Coke. And man, it was bitter. It tasted like straight meth with a little Coke mixed in. It was really powerful, So I started doing that. I felt sort of pressured to, really. You can't sit there and be the only guy who doesn't do something,
right?
And but I eventually chose to do it. No one made me start doing drugs. And I just went from one drug to another, and eventually, by the time we went on our East Coast tour to promote Forever Changes, I was rooming with Kenny at that time, and I went into his bedroom for something, and he's got his bass apart on the bed, and he has a little metal plate over the back of the neck, has it off, and he's putting small packets of heroin in there. And he said, yeah, he said, I'm taking plenty. And so and I said, okay, we're taking heroin to New York, you know. And so when we got there, I was rooming with Kenny at the time, and he said, you know, well, you want a snort of this? You know, so I said, yeah, okay, sure. So I took a snort of it, and, you know, once you do a drug, you lose your fear of it. You think, wow, it's not like I was told when I was young. You know, I always heard, wow, heroin addicts, man, you know, they're sleeping on the street and in prison, and, you know, but really normal people do heroin, you know.
Now more than ever, the opioids.
Now more than ever. Now it's you see it on television.
Now, is it true that Arthur didn't want to tour that much?
Yeah, he wanted to tour less and less. And I think the bottom line was that he had plenty of money.
Because the band was so popular in LA that he could just make a living that way?
Right. And the thing is, he got paid, and then he gave us money out of the check. And so he always ended up with more. And also he was getting a lot of royalties. And we weren't seeing any royalties, the people in the group. We were all living in small places in the Hollywood Hills. And I think Arthur had actually bought a home. It was the house that Peter Fonda is in The Trip. It's that indoor-outdoor swimming pool and, you know, nice house. So anyway, I mean, he was making money, and so he really didn't feel the need to work. And so we were pretty much just skimming by. And one time I asked him, I said, hey, what happened to our royalties? You know, and he said, well, we have a recording debt to pay off, and then when that's paid off, you'll start to get your royalties, you know. Okay. So that's what happened. We never got them. That's what happened. Yeah.
Did he feel more like a peer to you, or was he more like a leader?
There were times when Arthur was a peer, and we all got along real good, and he was a regular guy. And then there were times when he took a more austere position, like, I'm up here and you guys are just my helpers.
Orange skies, carnivals in cotton candy, and you, and I love you too, you know I do.
What was your next step personally after you left the group?
Well, what happened was after we got back from Florida, actually was where we came back from, Arthur and our road manager, Neil Rappaport, had flown back directly from New York to L.A. because Arthur had some business he wanted to take care of. So he and Neil came on back to L.A., and the rest of us went down to Florida to do the Miami Pops concert, and then Arthur was going to meet us there in time to do it. But what happened was our road manager, Neil Rappaport, he OD'd on heroin and died when they were back in L.A. So Arthur said, I'm just going to stay here. I got business to take care of. And so we all just came on back to L.A. We didn't play the Miami Pops Festival. So after that, we really didn't ever work together again that I can remember. We just more or less hung in our houses and had a good time, but we didn't really work, you know. And so we saw each other less and less. communication pretty much stopped, and I started playing with other musicians, and I guess everybody else did too. I think. And I know. Well, Arthur recorded the For Sale album with
Right.
some new people. You
Right.
know, so that was sort of the end of the band that had recorded Forever Changes, because we just sort of heard through the grapevine, yeah, Arthur's going to record these songs with some guys from Teddy Neely's group. That was their identity. So they did that, and so at that time I started just playing with other musicians. I went up to Seattle and played with Danny O'Keefe up there, and came back down to L.A., and a friend of mine told me, Neil Diamond, his drummer, is about to turn in his resignation, and I told him about you, and he'd like for you to come down and see him at the Troubadour tonight, and maybe you'd want to play drums with Neil Diamond, you know. So I went down to the Troubadour that night, and I went on in with with my buddy who knew him, and I'd never seen Neil Diamond before, but it was what became typical Neil Diamond. I mean, he had on a black rhinestone shirt, and he played all his hits, you know, Sweet Caroline, all of them. And when I saw it, you know, I thought, you know, this isn't really what I had in mind when I dropped out of school to become a musician, was being Neil Diamond's backup drummer, you know. But I'll give it a shot anyway, because it might be something that, you know, maybe these people are real nice and it's something I can enjoy doing. So we met at the Moose Lodge on Cherokee in Hollywood, and had a couple of rehearsals. And Neil showed up one night, and he had some kind of an altercation with someone, and he was all mad, you know, and he was just kind of grumpy and arrogant, and
No, thank you.
so later on that night, I called my buddy and I said, yeah, tell Neil I'm not going to be able to do it. And so, you know, it wasn't too long after that Arthur signed a contract to record for Blue Thumb. And the Blue Thumb's label owner asked him to see if he could get the original guys back together who had been on Forever Changes. So he called everybody, and we got together at the little Italian restaurant below the Canyon Country Store in Laurel Canyon. And we decided to go ahead and do that. He said, yeah, are you guys available? And yeah, we can do it. And so we did that without Brian, because Brian was in Hawaii. So we played a few gigs, and we actually sounded pretty good. And then that group kind of fell apart, you know. So I ended up playing a few dates with two of the guys that had been on the For Sale album, and then that group kind of fell apart as well. And, you know, the whole thing just had a completely opposite and different feel from when I first became a professional musician. You know, it was, instead of being exciting and happy, it was kind of down and depressing. And so I just thought, well, I'm going to try working regular jobs for a while and see how I like that. So I got working on shipping and receiving docks and running offset print machines, and I got into law school. I went to law school for a while, but I was still doing drugs. The drug habit followed me for years after. And so, you know, when you're doing drugs, you can't study and retain information and do well on exams dependably. And so I didn't fail out, but I dropped out of school. And just did regular jobs. I went to work eventually for the phone company and worked a construction crew, installed and repaired telephones, pulled cable, and I enjoyed it. That was a lot of fun, you know. And eventually I bought a small, I met my wife actually in Los Angeles, and we got married and moved up to South Lake Tahoe, and I bought a small catering business up there. And eventually, after years and years, we moved on down to Las Vegas, and here we are.
Well, when did you decide to clean up?
It was about the time that my wife and I were getting ready to get married. And this was when I was still with the phone company. And she let me know that she would prefer it if I didn't do drugs. And I could kind of tell at that moment. I mean, it had that defining feeling of, this is it. I have to choose one or the other. I knew at that moment, I thought, I either have to give up drugs now or I'm never going to give up drugs. And so I stopped,
How did you do it?
I was okay. I mean, I felt good from the time I stopped. It was a clean feeling. It's just like, they say, I'm going to clean up. Well, it's a clean feeling. When you stop doing drugs, you feel clean and free of this anchor that's around your ankle. I still remember once I was laying around my pad, and I had arranged, like I was a middleman in a heroin transaction regularly, almost every day. And so I would call the person who was the supplier, and this was back in the day of pagers, So this person, he went by the name Louise Heddig. He just picked this female name. So I would call the pager group and I would say, I want to leave a message for Louise Heddig, and then he would get back to me. He would call me. So I had left the message one day, and he didn't call. And he didn't call, and he didn't call, and I'm sitting there for hours. And I'm watching TV, and this movie came on, starring one of the people that used to come see us at Gazzari's, Cameron Mitchell. And the name of the movie was Monkey on My Back. I thought, oh yeah, okay. And
did you take it as a divine
I did.
intervention?
I did. I left, and if he ever called, I wasn't there. So that was one of the times that I realized this can't go on. That I was too beholden to the drug life if I did that. And I was never a shooter of heroin, but I did snort it, and it's the same high, just not as risky.
Smile for the time that I've been given such a little while, and the things that I must do consist of more than style. There are places that I am going. This is the only thing that I am sure of.
I miss playing music every day because I still have a self-image of musician. I mean, that's what I always did the best, I mean, when I was running that offset print machine, I turned out the cleanest copies that had ever been turned out on that machine. I used to have people come and tell me, wow, your copies are so clean. That's because I gave the same intensity to making clean copies as I did to being a musician. I tried really, really hard to be perfect. And, that's the kind of thing that that you only get it back as a musician. You don't really get it back running on an offset print machine or installing telephones, So I just miss music and playing music, but I still listen to music, Ornette Coleman and Coleman Hawkins, all of those people. I still listen to that music. And the early rock is still great. Mickey and Sylvia, Love is Strange, man. I mean, that's just a great song, man, and a great recording.
What do you think about the most these days?
I just enjoy doing the things that people who are no longer working at a job do. I do a lot of my home improvement repairs at my house, and my own landscaping, and just stay busy like that, have a good time,
Well, the music that you made, even though it's not something that you feel comfortable listening to, is something that has been a constant companion in my life for a long time, and I'm so glad that you were here, and thank you so much for being part of the show, Mike.
Oh, I appreciate it, Joe. Thanks for having me on.
The Trap Set is produced by me, Joe Wong, along with Chris Karwowski, who also edits the program. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Trap Set, and visit our website, thetrapset.net, to subscribe to our show for free. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please donate to our show. If you can't afford to donate, please tell a friend and give us a good rating on iTunes. Send your feedback and guest requests to thetrapset@gmail.com.